Hello everyone, this is Chris Jamel at Exiton Interactive, and in this video we're going to focus on applying conditional classes to our inputs and our buttons. Just as we've previously done, is we've updated the validator icon to respond to whether or not the particular validator is passed or not. We're going to do something similar to the inputs and the buttons, so that we have a basic understanding of what we're doing here. If we go back to the working example, so you can see that whether or not regardless of whether you're logging in or registering, the outline or the border for the inputs and the buttons and the background of the buttons are gray. So that's indicating that there has been no change to the form group or the form control, so it's pristine. In the case of registering, we have, say for the email, if I enter into the email, I get it to update to be red because it's invalid. We get the X. The moment we get it to be valid, it goes orange, and we get this arrow to the right and a subtle flashing of the background to say that this the user needs to confirm this. So we move over to the confirmation. It starts off red, showing that it's invalid. The moment that it becomes valid, or it matches the email, it turns green and we get the arrow, or we get the check mark. So this is what we're going to focus on implementing today. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio, and the first thing that I'm going to modify is the template. So I'm going to go to the authenticator.component.pug file. I'm going to open that, and I'm going to bring up notes. And what we're going to do here primarily is to modify the form control group mix-in. The first thing that I'm going to do, so the reason that our inputs and the buttons start off red is because we have this .invalid class. I'm going to delete that and put in a pair of parentheses. And inside that, we've already seen how to apply a class here. And what we're going to do, same for the icon, is put our pair of our square brackets, and we'll say ng class, and that's going to equal, we'll put a couple backticks. What we're going to do here is make a method call, and the method that we're going to call is get input group class, and put our parentheses, and we'll put a pair of single quotes. Inside of that we'll have our dollar square bracket or curly brackets and key. So we're doing the string interpolation on the key that's passed in. And so we're going to send a string, since we have these single quotes, we're going to send the string key into this method. Next, I'm going to adjust the button. Actually, it's nothing to do with this, but should have already done it. We're going to say the type of the button is just button. It's not a submit button. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove the times class, the font awesome times, which is giving us the X, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make it a conditional class, so we'll put our square brackets, ng class, and because I apparently like very long names, we're going to call this method get input group button icon class. We're going to do the same thing as we did above, and we're going to pass in the string of the key. So that's going to be the two methods that we need to apply the classes to our icon and to the input and the button through the input group. Next, what we're going to do is just make a small change to the actual authenticator template here. I'm going to remove the hard-coded login. I'm going to put a pair of curly brackets and then say title. And this is telling Angular that to look at our Typescript class for a property, in our case property, could be a field, but a property called title, take the value of that property and place it within this H3. So the double curly brackets are how we're saying take the value of the title. So this is the interpolation for this property title. So I'm going to save that. Next thing I'm going to do is modify the styles just a little bit. So I'm going to go down here to the bottom. I'm actually going to copy this variable so I don't misspell something. But we're going to specify this awaiting confirmation color. So we've already talked about it previously here. If I go back, once a input is validated, the first either password or email. Once they're validated, they go into this awaiting confirmation, which is just to say, put this orange color border on them, get this icon, and do a little flashing with the button. So that's what we're starting to specify here. And then I'm going to say, go to the authenticator. So the authenticator class, inside of that, you'll find input groups. And then if those input groups are also awaiting confirmation, so in other words, if they also have a awaiting confirmation CSS class to them, do this. And the thing is we're going to say include input group and awaiting confirmation color. So we've already defined previously what the input group did in basically prior episode. This is just simply our mix-in to color the buttons and the inputs, and basically that's it for it. So now also we need to specify that the button should blink a little bit if it's awaiting confirmation, and we're going to do that in the CSS. Could do it obviously in JavaScript, but there's no need for this. And so what we'll do is we'll say keyframes, give it a name that's longer than it probably should be, keeping with the tradition. So this is, I'm going to call keyframes awaiting confirmation valid button. Actually, I'm just going to call it button. Okay, and in this, what we're going to do is say, so it's going to start off, so at 0%, we start off with a background color that is equal to, awaiting confirmation color. At 50%, we're going to say the background color, and we're going to use a Sass function of lighten. We'll say awaiting confirmation color. We'll lighten it by, say, 10%. So, of course, we've previously used darken. Now we're going to use lighten. And at 100%, we're going to say background color, no lighten, should be back to our awaiting confirmation color. So that takes care of defining the keyframes. So we're going to still be within the awaiting confirmation class. We're going to come down here and we're going to say button, and I think that's all we need actually, just say button. And what we're going to say, animation name, and it's awaiting confirmation. No, it's the keyframes. Let me just copy them. Okay, and now we have animation iteration count, and we're going to do this infinite, and animation duration will be 1.5 seconds. Okay, so great. So the awaiting confirmation class is on our input group. The mix-in here will color the border, color the input, and color the button, and then we'll apply the animation through this. And next, what we need is to be within the outside the input group here. And what I'm going to do here, I've decided that, look at the example. So if we focus on the validator icon, when I get to, let's say 5, what we'll see is it's going to switch over to the check mark, and it's an abrupt change, right? It switches right away. There's no animation transition or anything like that. So I don't like that now. Apparently I was fine with it before, but now I don't like it. So now I'm going to go to back to the SCSS, and I'm going to put in here dot validator dash icon, and I'm going to say transition, and I'll just say all 0.5 seconds, so half a second. I'm going to save it. We'll see the effect here in a moment. So save that. I'm going to go now to the Typescript file. So what I need to do here is, first I'm going to specify that title property. So we're going to have a getter for it. And I'll say public get title. And title is a little bit more involved than our previous getters. But we're going to say, so if this dot is login, then if this dot is subaction forgot password, we're going to return forgot password as the title. If this dot is sub action forgot username, return forgot username. Lastly, if it's neither of those, then we'll return login. Great. Next, I'll say if this dot is register. Now I'm wholly aware that you know, I've mentioned it before in previous video. It's either logging in or registering. That's it. At least for now, and maybe in the future there's other states, but at least for now it's just registering a login. So in principle you could just say, you know, just do it here, but I'm just going to stick with this and say, so if there's registering, we're going to say return and register. Of course, now that we've done that, I need to specify what happens if it's not is register, and for now we will say throw an error if the application is not logging in or registering. So I know I need to fix something. So that'll take care of the title. Next thing I'm going to do is specify the two methods that we need. For those, I'm just going to copy and paste here. All we're saying is for the get input group class, we're returning valid. And for the icon class, button icon, we're going to give it a check. Let me save that. We'll go back here and take a look. So what we have now is invalid and times, right? So it's red with an X. If I've done everything correctly for once, I'm going to refresh here and we're going to get it to be green with a check mark. All right, so green with a check mark. Great. You can check on the, well, also, so okay, it says login at the top. We'll go to the register, refresh, it says register now, green with a check mark. Great. So we're good to go in these cases. One thing now, one thing to pay attention to here. So we're going to do the validation. Well, actually, I haven't. Well, yeah, we've changed one thing. So let me get out to, let's see, 7 of them. So if you pay attention to the X here for this validator icon, when I add in the next A, yeah, it does this kind of jittery, ugly motion that I completely cannot stand. And what's the fix for this? Well, the fix for this is we go back to our style sheet, style, and a couple videos ago, or maybe even the last video, I think I made the correction, I don't know. At some point I said, hey, the X, the times, doesn't look right next to the check mark and the circle. Who knows why I decided that. I said, let's just change the font size to be slightly larger. And of course, that's, you know, fairly okay with the times when, you know, there's no transitions going on. But now that I want it to be animated, the problem is that it's animating from 1.3 EM to 1. So it's giving that jittering thing. So what I'm going to do is remove the correction that I made earlier. So we no longer need that. If I go back, refresh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Next one, now we have, you know, a much smoother transition, doesn't change around. And at least for the next 5 minutes, that's the way we're going to keep it. And I think we're going to go ahead and close the style sheet and the template, and we're going to focus just on the Typescript file now. So the next thing that we're going to do is, so all we're doing right now is we've replaced invalid with valid, right? We have a static CSS class that's being applied, and to apply it, we're calling this method. Same for the button, our icon for the button. So let's add a little bit more, you know, something more dynamic. What we'll do here is say const, and we'll call it control, and that is equal to this and the key, and we're going to cast that as a form control. So we're essentially doing the same thing that Angular does. What we know is we're getting passed in the string, the key, and that key is the exact name of properties that are on our component. So we're just saying, give me that component, casting it as a form control, and now we're just going to say return control.valid. So if it's valid, return valid, If it's invalid, return invalid. All right. And then I'm just going to copy these down here. Of course, what we want to return, so if it's valid, we want FA check mark, check, and FA times. We'll save that. Return back to our browser, refresh. Okay, so we have everything red again. Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the next one, we'll hope, will turn green with a check mark. So now we have validation going on. Or at least the validation was already going on, but at least the indication that it's validation is happening with our buttons and inputs. So we'll return here. Of course, life cannot be so simple as to say that just whether or not the control is valid or not will handle our case, handle our situation. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in a field, a private field. We'll come back up here, we'll say private, and it's is, and username unique. It's a Boolean, no. So we are going to have to implement the is unique validator, but we'll do that after we can actually, communicate with the server. But in this case, we do need a Boolean, and notice we're setting it to null. This username unique, so when the user first lands on the page and there has been no communication with the server, we don't know whether it's unique or not, so we're going to use that case to be null. Once the server has responded, then we can set it to be either true or false. So we need basically 3 distinct states for it. So that'll handle that. Let me go back to my get input group class. So what we're going to do first here, and probably overkill again, but we'll say if type of and control is undefined or is null. So it would be possibly undefined, not null, but ReSharper there will complain to me if I don't use the null as well. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to put in, copy this, we're going to just throw an error. So if for some reason we manage to pass in a key that is incorrect for some reason, and the control is undefined, then we'll just throw this error. Otherwise, we will continue on. And the continuing on is basically we're going to do a switch on the key. So both of them have the same thing. If it's the username we're dealing with, we have to do something. If it's everything else, we do something else, right? So we'll say case this username, control username key. I'll put break and then default break. Okay, so back to the username. All right, so let me type this in and then we'll see what it says. So if control.pristine, or I'm going to put up pair of parentheses here, or this.isRegister, and this dot, and we'll do the username is username unique equals null, then I want to return an indeterminate. Right? So if the control is pristine, so in other words, the user has just landed on the page and hasn't made any updates to it, then we want to have it gray. Also, and this is just particularly for the username, if we're on the register side of things, and the is username unique is still null, so we have not communicated or we're waiting for the response from the server, then we also want it to show gray, right? Once we get it back, either the control is not pristine and and we've returned, or we have the information from the server, what we want to do is to say return control.valid. So if it's valid, put the valid class. If it's invalid, put the invalid class. We no longer need the break. Next, so that'll take care of it for our username control. Next, we're going to go down to everything else, and we'll say, so if this dot is login, what we're going to return, we're going to say return control dot pristine. So again, if the control is pristine, we are going to return indeterminate. And then if the control is not pristine, then we want to know the, here, we'll just copy this. We'll just say whether or not it's valid or invalid. And again, this is just in the case of login, because we don't have to we don't have to confirm anything. So that takes care of logging in. Next, so now we're just dealing with registering. So if key is equal to the password key, or key is equal to, and what we need, email key. If it's either of those, we're basically going to do the same thing. Let me just copy it in here. We'll do the same thing as the login, except that instead of saying it's valid if the control is valid, we're going to say awaiting confirmation if it's valid. Otherwise, it's just invalid. And that's just for the two prior, the first inputs. The confirm inputs, they only matter if the control is valid or not, or they only care if the control is valid or not. So what we're going to do is just replace that with the return valid or invalid. So I'm going to save that. Everything's built. We'll go back, refresh. So now we have the inputs are gray. Great. For login here, it starts immediately checking or not whether or not it's valid or not. So we're good. Working so far, and coincidentally works for this case. For the icon, I guess, is the tiny icon that we've already, or the tiny bit of code we've done for the icon is actually correct for the login. If we go back to register, again, it's not going to change from the gray because we're not updating the is username unique from null yet. But if we go down here, and I'm going to skip password because I don't want to type in so much. If we go down to the email, we said, hey, at A, we get it to go orange, button's background is orange, and I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it is flashing. We'll deal with the icon. And the confirm ones obviously start off red. And if they are validate, they do go green, right? Again, just so happens it works in this case. The check mark works. Now, so that part's done. Just refresh those and go back. So next we need to deal with the actual icon itself. So for the icon, we're going to start off adding another field here. And I'm going to call it private is checking username. Probably could just say is checking username. It's also a Boolean, which equals false. And of course, this is the one we're going to use to know whether or not we're actively communicating or waiting for a response from the server. So I'm going to go back to my get input group button icon class method. And let's see, we're going to do pretty much the same thing as before. Let me put this error in here. Of course, again, the error is just in case the control is either undefined or null. And I shouldn't have erased that, but that's okay. What we'll do is we'll take this. We've already discussed and saw that if this dot is login, the user is logging in, this is sufficient. This is all we need. We only need to know is whether the control is valid or not. So we don't have to update. There's no, we don't have a different icon because we're not waiting for the server to respond to us. We don't have to duplicate entry anything. So that's done. So next we'll go switch, and we'll switch on the key again. And as usual, like I mentioned, what we're going to do is we'll have a case where this dot username key, right, break, and then everything else. We'll go back up to here with the username key, so we're modifying it for the username control. And we'll say if control dot pristine or this dot is username unique equals null. So if it's pristine, so the user hasn't touched it, or is username unique is null, means we have not had a response back from the server yet. So what we'll say is let CSS class equal, we want the font awesome circle dash o dash notch. That's the circle with the little notch in it. And the reason we're using the variable here is that we want to say that if this, and we're saying is checking username availability. So we're waiting for a response. We've sent it to the server. We're waiting for the server to respond to us. So we want to take the CSS class that we defined above, and we'll take it, CSS class, and then we'll also put the spin on it. So we'll put the font awesome spin class, that way the button will rotate, and then we'll return CSS class. So that takes care of it. Well, no, it doesn't. So we could have the instance where it's not pristine and we have the response back from the server, say. So all we want to do then is to respond on whether or not it's valid. So if it's valid, send back the check mark. If it's invalid, give it the times. Next, we'll do the same thing we did before. So if key is equal to this dot this dot control password key, or key is equal to this control email key, then what we want to say is return. So if the control is valid, we need to send back the class, but we're not going to be, it's not going to be check. In this case, it will be the arrow right, because we need to go to the input to confirm what we have entered, and if it's invalid, just times the X. Next, the last case here is if we're in the confirm side of things, we want to return control.valid. If the control is valid, we get the F8 check again. If it's invalid, we do something different this time. It's the arrow left. Perfect. Save that. Hope everything built just fine. Return back. So again, logging in. All right. So we have made an error. Let's see. Oh, we have errors all over the place here. What is our problem? Put button class. Let's look back, take a look here at the button. Button. So the button is getting valid. That's not very helpful. We actually need the class associated with the font awesome icon, and here's our problem. It's not supposed to be valid, it's supposed to be FA check, and this should be FA times. And as usual, if I just follow my notes, everything would work out fine, but those moments I think I remember. Okay, so now we have our times back to the username goes correctly, and that works fine. Great. And we notice that the confirm ones are gray because we don't really care about them. So refresh here. We have our icons still red, so they have the right icons going on. Again, not going to get much on the username. If we go down to the email, invalid, it's valid, and apparently I like to make mistakes, and you'll find here easily that I'm the world's worst speller, so that should be arrow right. Refresh, try that again. So we've got our correct icon. We come over here, it's confirm email is invalid, so we get the arrow to the left. And when we update it to be valid, we get it to say, or it has a green check, or the button is green with a check mark. So I think that then seems to be working for everything. And I think that'll do it for this video. And as I'm getting into the habit of it, I want to say thank you for watching the video. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments section below. Outside of that, I will talk to you later.